Hey, it's Chris. January, retail. What do you need to know? What's out there? What's new? What's hot? What's on your radar? What should be on your radar? And a little bit of everything in between. That's what we're talking about today. As you guys requested in the comment section, what are the games that are going to be in line with that? So that's where we're going with this, right? Let's do this. Retail is not hot. Retail is not necessarily sexy. But you know what retail is? Retail is freaking available. Well, for the most part. There's a little caveat there with a few of these games. But that is the big benefit over crowdfunding, which is why I like talking about it, which also scares me because, you know, I like the promise, I like the idea of a lot of these things. And when the actuality comes of hitting the table, when I get them, I mean, that's the harder point. And so that's why retail is always a harder sell for me. But that aside, you know, let's talk about what's hot at retail, what you should know about at retail, and what should be on your radar. So let's do this. Number one right here, Clank Catacombs. Clank Catacombs Direwolf. This is the end-all, be-all of all of the Clank games, apparently. The deck building modularity that goes along with this game gives you something different than the other Clank predecessors. It's been more positively received than I think than any other Clank predecessor. The biggest issue I have with it is the $60 price point, even, not MSRP, but actual retail price. As someone who hasn't played Clank, this definitely is on my radar. I definitely have an interest in it, but can it win me over? I mean, that's one that is going to be highly on my radar either way. It's one, for a reason at the top of this list, because as someone who does not buy retail regularly, it has me enticed as well. So that cannot be understated. Clank is a standard in a lot of people's collections nowadays that are looking for something slightly different, pressure luck, deck builder-esque. And the modularity that this brings has been relatively positively received across the board from big-time video reviewers as well as big-time writers and reviewers, written reviewers across the board. So take that for what you will. That's not my words there. That's other people's words. Number two here is going to be actually an expansion to make this list, and that's the latest expansion for Dune, also from Direwolf, the Immortality expansion. I have a copy sitting on my countertop. It's still in shrink. But the addition of more to Dune, that's always the question with an expansion. Is more better? Well, in this case, again, people seem to think that more is okay and more is very well and more is I don't want to play without it. And that's the type of expansion that you need. And that's the type of expansion that this has been bringing to the table from the people that have played it, the people that have already had copies for months and are enjoying it. But now it's more widely available in the last month or so. So if you're like me at all and you liked Dune Imperium or you wanted more out of it, this should be on the top of your list. Now, again, not having played it, can't give you my personal preference in terms of which Dune expansion I would get first or which one's better or which one. That's a future me problem video sort of thing. Now, number three, again, I have a copy. I've played it. It's going to be on my top games of 2022. I'm not going to tell you where yet, but this is Heat Pedal to the Metal. There's a reason that this has got so much acclaim. This has got, not necessarily the big chunkiness, the big decisive, nuanced layers of all of the other racing games that are out there, right? But you know what it has? It has cross-compatibility with gamers like me who have no interest normally in a racing game. That cannot be understated. The hand management of the cards, of whether trying to go fast, burn around the corners, or being able to mitigate the heat that you have to pay off in case you break the limits of what your vehicle can do on a turn-by-turn basis, shifting up and down gears, different maps. There are 4 in the base game, as well as some asymmetry that can be added in terms of modularity. Yeah, it's a pricier price point along the lines of Clank Catacombs in the $60, $50 price point range. But is it worth it? Yeah, I mean, there's a reason right now that this one is not really available at all. It's between print runs right now. So the retail side of things is very, very hot, very, very sparse. But if you can get your hands on a copy, I'm going to give it a pretty good recommendation. And my review's not even out yet. So take that for what you will. Next up, we have Splendor Duel. I did the review already. Splendor Duel. It's behind me somewhere over here, right here. This is a freaking amazing game. If you haven't seen this game, ignore the Splendor. Ignore Splendor. Just think of this as a great 2-player dueling game with Splendor pieces in the middle on a board that gets randomly refilled that you're drawing pieces off of in order to complete your engine, because there's more of engine building as well with this, with a tactical nature. Is that enough? I mean, again, people have said that this is a really good game. I have routinely said, if this did not have Splendor, people would have it on their top 10 games of the year list. Because a lot of people, I don't think, tried it because they said, ew, Splendor. It's on my list. I'll tell you that right now. There's a reason it's on my list. It's that good. If you're looking for a nice, easy hit the table with more tactical depth in under half an hour play style of game, This one is probably one of, if not the best, that came out in 2022. That's saying something. Don't discount it. What else do we got? Well, we got a few that are going to be, again, very well recognized. We have, from Restoration Games, we have the latest expansion from Unmatched, Genie and Houdini. And with all of the Restoration Games in the Unmatched series, what side are you on? Is this your type of two-player dueling on a battlefield, or do you prefer more of a card-driven? This is, Star Wars Epic Duels redone with classic characters, and I really like it. I just haven't had a chance to really pick it up. My kids are more enamored with Dice Throne right now, so we're more in that realm of things. I personally have always been more of an Exceed Sakura Arms type of person as well. So will I eventually have something like this in my collection? Maybe, but right now this is another in the line of the classic reinventions of this system that people really seem to love. And this one has the hotcakes written all over it. Now, it's a little bit contrary to the other ones that have come out in the past month or two as well. From the Marvel side of things, there's another Marvel set that's coming out either currently or in the next month as well, in terms of, sort of the Avenger-esques, your Daredevil, your Bullseye, your Luke Cage, those sort of characters. There's another one coming out from that side of things. So, but this, I almost prefer this because this is just a classical reimagining. When you think of some of those characters, you don't think of sort of what their powers are going to be or how they're interacting, but they're all uniquely different. A genie. A Houdini is doing magic, and the genie is also doing magic in a completely different way. So the reception also on that side of things has been very positive. And the Unmatched people, I would say this is probably one of the better ones or more interesting ones to me since Cobble and Fog. Next up, and this one is also crowdfunding based, but now coming to retail, we have the latest Lacerda, and this is Weather Machine, where you're trying to create a weather machine or control the weather machine from basically destroying the world after it gets out of control. And as with the Evil Griffin games, there's not really a whole lot of difference between the retail side of things and the production side of things on the Kickstarter, except for maybe a little bit slight deluxeification and maybe just a promo or a couple promos that you may be missing out on. Overall, not a whole lot of difference. So if you're looking for that, that's always a safe bet. It's got a relatively good rating on Board Game Geek already. It's just the question of, is that a game you're really going to pick up at retail? Because I feel like most of the heavy gamers that are really looking at that seriously are getting it on crowdfunding. So I don't know what the retail demand for that is, but that is going to be out currently or out very shortly from the retail side of things. Similarly, next up, we have another one that's gone a different route, but is another variation of a game that you're already familiar with, and that's Wingspan Asia. As more of a two-player Wingspan official version, as opposed to just people taking Wingspan and just playing it with two people. And I've heard mixed things about this. Some people really like it, as it does a little bit different in terms of the two-player, and I've heard other people say that, it streamlines it too much, it baselines it too much, and it just gets away from what they liked about Wingspan in the first place. Again, this is the sort of thing that, as someone who plays two-player games with my wife, this would be more of the intro to me, because I don't want to necessarily spend the $50 or $60, whatever Wingspan goes for nowadays, and instead getting a $25 or $30 copy of this might be more palatable, because then you can incorporate it with some of the other stuff if you really want to. And so that's been slowly rolling out from Stonemaier, along with their big box, and again, who knows how many other expansions there are going to be in the future. So this is just another in the line that's going to be compatible all the way across the board. Now we also have another interesting sort of expansion standalone game as well with My Litter Everdell. Everdell Lite, Everdell Junior is essentially what it is. And I had mixed feelings about these games, but when it was announced, it's really gotten hot. And with that, you expected, okay, I'm going to buy it right away, and then I'm also going to get rid of it right away. So I've seen a few of them on the secondary market. And the tricky point of these is, if you're like me and you've got these kids who are sort of in between, where they're not really playing Ticket to Ride Junior anymore, Catan Junior is probably a little bit too simple for them, but is something like the full version of Catan, the full version of Everdell, really probably a little bit too complex at the same time. Not necessarily always the complexity, but also the length. This is sort of the tweener, and does it work for where you or your family or your kids are at? That's the tricky point to estimate, and so that's why I always hesitate on these games, but it's making waves, and people, again, relatively have been well received with their feelings on this game, and so it's going to be an interesting test of the market, sort of like My Little Scythe, if you will, speaking of Stonemaier games, to go back to them for a second, where people felt like it was a good enough game to stand on its own, and they could have both, but they ultimately probably also preferred one or the other, especially as their kids get older, and maybe it's not one that you're going to be playing with your game group either. So food for thought from that side of things. Next up, we have the latest edition of Great Western Trail here, the Argentinian version, which is again offering a slight variation on the original Great Western Trail. And now these are all in the trilogy of the 2.0 versions of Great Western Trail. So not just the original version, and it's giving you new ways, new manners, new routes, new cattle, new ways to prod the cattle, all sorts of those things, right? And so that's the main question when this comes to retail, and this gets a wider scope and a wider comparison. Again, from people who are more familiar with the original, not necessarily one edition versus the other, but just in general, to say, do you need both of these games? But because this one is coming out this year, and the third in the sequel, or the third in the trilogy, 3 in a trilogy, 3 not in a sequel, that's how my day's going right there, folks. How's your day going? That's the question. Do you need all 3 of these? Are they similar enough? Are they different enough? Is it sort of like with Garfield games when you have the trilogy of South Tigris, of the other Garfield games trilogies? Which ones are different enough? Which one is going to suit your tastes, your appetites the best? And I don't know. I think this is going to be a try and not necessarily know before you buy, which makes it a little bit difficult from that aspect. And are you really going to probably prefer one or the other? Yeah, because I'm not sure it's necessarily a 2.0 version. I think it's a different flavor, a different theme. And I think it's going to be something more akin with the trilogy to something like Azul, with the 4 versions of Azul that are out nowadays, where you're going to find the flavor of Azul that you like the best. You can have all of them in your collection. They're equally different enough, but there's a similar overlap that if you really liked one over the others, you don't necessarily need all of them either. They're not going to be that different. So that's something to consider about. Now, the next 2 up, I'm just going to cover them together because these are finally making their way over to the retail aspect of things. And this is Tiletum and Woodcraft, both Essen hotness that we really haven't heard a whole lot about since. Now, Tiletum has been a little bit more hot since Essen, but realistically, both have plummeted rather drastically since the Essen hype. And you're not hearing nearly as much about them, especially Woodcraft. And especially with the comparisons to the other Euros, I'm not seeing many or either of those games on top 10's list of the year, really. And maybe that's because my own bias, and I don't view those people who are looking at those heavier Euro-style games in the first place and their lists. But I don't recall seeing them widely as opposed to a lot of other games that have similar vibes or similar natures. Again, my own bias speaking there more than anything else. Tell me when I'm wrong in the comment section. Now that's going to be the question. Now that they're more widely available, was it a fluke? Was it a flash in the pan? What was it in terms of, does this have lasting? Because when I look back, and I was going to do a video on this, but this is just more of a good topic point here. When I looked back at the top Essen hypes for like the last 2 or 3 years, there's not too many games that have carried on. There's not too many games that have really left a wider berth than a few months in that regard. Now, okay, Arc Nova, whatever, again, exceptions, not the rules. And so that's the question, is how many of these, like these 2, are going to stand up? But now we're going to see, because now they're going to be available mostly in a Northern American market in the next month or so, if they're not already available from that standpoint. Last up here, the other one that I have to give a mention to is King of Monster Island, which is on the shelf behind me. A pandemic-esque version of King of Tokyo that now takes more of a cooperative styling and sense rather than a head-to-head knock 'em out. You are doing the head-to-head, it's just you versus the monster, you versus the game, a player versus environment rather than player versus player. It's a little bit long for what I think it could have been. It's still a very notable game in terms of a lighter co-op. It gives you the powers, but I think with some of these co-op games, you really don't always get the full extent of what the powers are because of the nature of how quickly some of these games can go swinging one way or the other depending on the difficulty. Either you trash them right away and you don't get strong enough to be able to use those powers because you win the game too quickly, or you get a series of bad rolls, lucks, dice dropped in this game as well, because you're dropping dice into the center and getting the results that roll out to different parts of the monster island that activate the monsters, that activate the minions, that activate the abilities, and you can just get hosed as well when you have a mechanic like that. And how is that going to leave the taste in your mouth? Me personally, I have no problem with it, but I know that people are going to have a concern about that if that's not their forte or their ilk in terms of what they prefer in game mechanics. So there you go. That is a quick rundown of what else is coming or currently coming out in this month. The other thing that I have my eyes on as a little spoiler here at the end is the latest Arkham Horror LCG card game, whatever you want to call it, expansion, The Scarlet Keys. The campaign expansion, I believe, is coming out this month. And in the future months, we're also going to see a little bit more Marvel Champions. I believe Cycle 3 of Marvel Champions, the X-Men cycle, will also be coming out in the near future. I believe in February. I believe it's going to have Rogue and Gambit as well. And so that's going to be another interesting test of what does the X-Men continue to bring to Marvel Champions, just like what are Arkham Horror expansions continuing to bring in new and innovative ways to that crowd as well. Both two highly, highly, highly esteemed and thought of card games that seem to be still getting a very, very good treatment from FFG. Unlike my poor Star Wars Destinies and Star Wars Armada, which, sad face. Anyway, that's it. That's the retail video. Games you need to know about, games that should be on your radar, and games that might be of interest to you. So let me know if you want to see more of this in the future. Let me know what you think. Let me know what's on your radar from a retail side of things. Or if you're one of those crowdfunders only and you don't care about retail at all, that's okay too. But like I said, some of these games are from Kickstarter coming to retail finally, and it's always nice to be able to compare as well what that looks like. And as a final side note here, speaking of retail games that have come from Kickstarter, I have no idea where my Queen Games Hamburg copy is. It's been now 3 weeks since they said that they would start shipping after the new year, and no one has heard hardly anything. And I'm going to imagine it's probably going to be another month. Again, I don't know where the issue lies. I don't know where the fault lies. It's been a whole mess, and especially when you start running more than one campaign being fulfilled together with it. But eventually, those are going to be offered at retail as well from Queen. But Queen has shown us lately that that's not really a good avenue to pick them up, because they're jacking up that price from a crowdfunding standpoint to a retail side of things, which I just wonder as a long-term business model. Because now they've gone back to the crowdfunding campaigns with selling their backstock, as we just saw with our latest 2 campaigns. So it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt and price point wise in the future. So there you go. Final retail jibes, rambles, and rants here at the end. So stay classy. See you around. Thanks for tuning in. I have a Patreon. Subscribe below. I'm trying to get to 7K. I'm going to have a giveaway when I get to 7K. Spoilers there in case you're paying attention at the end. See you around. You didn't think that was going to be at the end there, did you? Yeah, you got a little bonus if you stayed till the end. Tell your friends.